Picture a regular office parking lot at like 8:15 a.m. Same guy, same spot, every single morning, pulling in with a 2011 Honda Civic. The paint's a little faded. There's a small dent on the rear bumper. It's the kind of car you don't even notice unless you're trying to judge somebody. And his coworkers, they totally do. They assume he's barely getting by. Like, man, he must be one surprise bill away from trouble. Maybe they even feel a little sorry for him. But here's the twist. That struggling guy has $4.2 million sitting in index funds. His house? Paid off. His kids' college? Already funded. He could retire tomorrow and nobody in that building would see it coming. And he still chooses the Civic. On purpose. Because the real secret about money in America is this. The people who look rich are usually spending. The people who are rich are usually hiding. So if you've ever wondered why the most financially powerful people in the room don't look like it, you're about to understand exactly how that game works and how you can use it. All right, so now that you know about the guy with the beat-up Civic, let's zoom out for a second. Because that story isn't some rare exception. It's actually way more common than most people realize. In fact, when researchers started digging into how real millionaires live in America, the results shocked almost everyone. Thomas Stanley and William Danko spent years studying wealthy households across the United States while writing The Millionaire Next Door. And what they discovered completely shattered the stereotype we all grow up believing. Most millionaires don't live in flashy neighborhoods. They're not surrounded by Lamborghinis and marble mansions. Instead, they're quietly living in middle-class neighborhoods, often in the same house they bought decades ago. Think about that for a second. Half of the millionaires studied had lived in the same home for more than 20 years, not constantly upgrading, not chasing bigger and bigger houses, just staying put while their investments quietly compounded in the background. And the cars? This is where it gets even more interesting. The #1 car brand driven by millionaires in America is Toyota. Right behind it is Honda, then Ford. Not BMW, not Mercedes, not Porsches, regular cars, the kind you see in literally every parking lot across the country. And this isn't because they can't afford something nicer. These are people who could easily walk into a dealership and drive away with a $120,000 luxury car without even blinking. But they don't. Because they understand something that most people never stop to calculate. Every extra dollar spent on appearance is one less dollar compounding for the next 20 or 30 years. And once you start thinking like that, the entire game of money starts to look completely different. But here's where the story takes an even more surprising turn. Because the people who look wealthy in America are often the ones with the least actual wealth. So here's where things get a little uncomfortable. Because the people who look the richest are often the ones in the most fragile financial positions. An Experian automotive study found something pretty shocking. About 61% of people earning over $250,000 a year drive regular cars, brands like Honda, Toyota, and Ford, cars that blend into any parking lot in America. But on the flip side, around 8% of people earning under $100,000 are driving luxury vehicles. Think about that math for a second. Someone making $50,000 a year is signing up for a $60,000 luxury car, massive monthly payments, expensive insurance, costly maintenance. From the outside, they look successful. Nice car, premium brand, shiny badge on the hood. But behind the scenes, their entire paycheck might already be spoken for. Mortgage, car payment, credit cards, subscriptions, lifestyle expenses that keep expanding every time income goes up. So they're stuck in a cycle that looks impressive, but leaves almost no room for wealth to grow. Meanwhile, the quiet millionaire in the Honda Civic, he's playing a completely different game. Instead of asking, how can I look successful? He's asking, how can I make this money grow for the next 30 years? That single mindset shift changes everything. Because the difference between looking wealthy and being wealthy isn't income, it's behavior. And once you understand the psychology behind those behaviors, you start to see why so many people spend their entire lives chasing the appearance of wealth while accidentally destroying the real thing. But the psychology behind this is where it gets really fascinating, because humans don't just buy things for practical reasons. We buy them to send signals. And that idea completely changes the way money gets spent. All right. Now let's talk about the psychology behind all of this, because this is where the whole money game gets really interesting. More than a century ago, economist Thorstein Veblen introduced a concept called conspicuous consumption. Sounds complicated, but the idea is actually pretty simple. People don't just buy things because they need them. They buy things to send signals. A $50 watch tells time just as accurately as a $50,000 watch. Both show the exact same hour, the exact same minute. So what's the extra $49,950 actually paying for? It's paying for the signal that says, I'm successful, I've made it, I belong in a higher status group. Luxury brands understand this perfectly. They're not just selling materials or craftsmanship, they're selling identity and perception. And once people start playing that signaling game, spending can spiral out of control without them even realizing it. Because every purchase becomes a comparison. A better car than the neighbor, a nicer watch than a coworker, a more impressive vacation than your friends posted on Instagram. Researchers sometimes call this the better than game, and the rules are brutal. There will always be someone with a bigger house, a newer car, a more expensive lifestyle, so the spending never stops. But the real cost isn't the price tag on the item. The real cost is the opportunity cost. Every leased BMW is money that didn't go into investments. Every designer handbag is shares of index funds that weren't purchased. Every status symbol is decades of compound growth that never happened. And over time, those decisions add up to hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars. But here's the twist most people never see coming. Trying to look wealthy doesn't just slow down wealth building, it can actually make you a target. And that's where things start getting a little darker. All right, so let's talk about the part almost nobody thinks about when they're chasing the image of wealth. Because looking rich doesn't just affect your spending, it also changes how the world treats you, and not always in a good way. According to research from Javelin Strategy, about 6.4% of the general public experiences identity theft in a given year. But for people with over $1 million in assets, that number jumps to over 8%. That might not sound huge at first, but when you scale it across millions of people, it's a big difference. Why? Because criminals follow the same logic everyone else does. They look for signals, expensive cars, luxury neighborhoods, high-end social media posts, designer brands. All of these things quietly broadcast the same message. This person probably has money. And once someone becomes visibly affluent, they become a much more attractive target for sophisticated fraud. Security experts even have a term for it: whaling attacks. Unlike random scam emails sent to thousands of people, these attacks are extremely targeted. Criminals build detailed profiles using social media, leaked data, and public records. Then they impersonate trusted figures: a financial advisor, a private banker, even a family member. Their goal is simple: trick the target into transferring money or revealing sensitive information. And the scale of the problem is massive. The Federal Trade Commission reported Americans lost over $10 billion to fraud in 2023 alone, with investment scams accounting for nearly half of that total. So here's the uncomfortable truth. The more visibly wealthy someone appears, the bigger the target they place on their back. Meanwhile, the quiet millionaire driving the old Civic, he's practically invisible, No flashy signals, no obvious wealth markers, nothing that attracts attention. And that invisibility doesn't just protect his money, it protects something even more valuable: his relationships. Because once visible wealth enters your social life, things start to change in ways most people never expect. So now think about what happens socially when someone looks wealthy. The moment people see visible signs of money, luxury cars, designer clothes, expensive neighborhoods, something subtle starts to shift in how they treat you. Expectations change. When you drive a luxury car, people assume you can afford the expensive restaurant. When you wear high-end brands, coworkers expect you to pick up the tab. When you live in an affluent area, everyone around you is spending at that same level. And suddenly, the baseline cost of life rises without you even noticing. This is where something called social comparison kicks in. Status only exists relative to other people. It's not absolute. It's comparative. So when you're surrounded by people spending more, traveling more, upgrading constantly, it quietly resets what feels normal. Your neighbor gets a bigger house. Your coworker buys a new luxury SUV. Your friends start taking international vacations every year. And before long, you feel pressure to keep up, even if nobody explicitly says it. But the person driving that old Honda Civic, they've opted out of that entire game. Nobody expects them to pay more than their share. Nobody assumes they're rolling in cash. Nobody builds social expectations around their perceived wealth. And that creates something surprisingly powerful: authentic relationships. Because here's a strange paradox researchers have found among wealthy individuals. As wealth increases, trust often decreases. People start wondering, do they like me, or do they like my money? When wealth is visible, every relationship becomes slightly harder to interpret. Friends, acquaintances, even extended family can behave differently once they believe someone is rich. But the person who appears middle class while quietly building wealth avoids this completely. Their friendships form naturally. Their relationships aren't filtered through financial status. People interact with them as a person, not as a wallet. And that invisible wealth strategy creates advantages that go far beyond just money. In fact, it can even affect how well you negotiate and how much you pay for things in everyday life. Because the moment someone thinks you're wealthy, the price of everything around you starts to change. Now think about how money changes everyday transactions, the small negotiations that happen constantly in life. Because here's something most people never notice. People adjust their prices based on what they think you can afford. A contractor pulling into a neighborhood full of luxury cars might quote one number, and then quote a completely different number in a middle-class area. Car dealers do the same thing. Walk into a dealership wearing flashy designer brands, talking about the luxury car you drove in with, and suddenly the salesperson assumes you're comfortable paying a premium. But show up looking ordinary? You often get treated like a value shopper. Same product, different price. This is why Warren Buffett once mentioned something interesting about his lifestyle. Despite being one of the richest men in the world, he still lives in the same Omaha house he bought back in 1958 for $31,500. And one of the advantages of that modest lifestyle? Almost nobody around him treats him like a billionaire. No inflated expectations, no special wealth pricing, just normal transactions. Over decades, that difference quietly saves enormous amounts of money. Think about how many purchases someone makes over a lifetime: home repairs, cars, insurance, services, professional fees. If every one of those comes with a hidden premium because people assume you're wealthy, the extra cost compounds into a serious amount of money. But invisible wealth avoids that entirely. The person who looks ordinary pays the ordinary price. And interestingly, this invisibility also creates a powerful advantage at work. Because when coworkers think you need the job, they treat you differently than someone who obviously doesn't. And that dynamic can quietly shift the balance of power in ways most employees never realize. Now let's take that idea into the workplace, because this is where invisible wealth becomes incredibly powerful. When your lifestyle screams, "I'm rich," people start making assumptions. Colleagues wonder why you're still working if you already seem financially comfortable. Managers question how motivated you really are. Clients start wondering if your fees are inflated. Visible wealth quietly changes the dynamics of professional relationships. But someone who appears financially modest, they blend in. Coworkers see them as relatable. Bosses assume they're motivated. Clients assume their pricing is fair. Nothing about their appearance triggers suspicion or resentment. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, that person might have years, sometimes decades, of financial security already built. And that changes their behavior in subtle but powerful ways. Because when you don't actually need the paycheck, you make decisions differently. You can negotiate more confidently. You can walk away from toxic environments. You can take calculated risks in your career. Ironically, the person who appears financially dependent often has the most financial freedom. That quiet confidence shows up in ways people can feel, even if they can't explain it. They're calmer in negotiations. They're less desperate for promotions. They're more willing to challenge bad decisions. Why? Because they know something most people around them don't. If things go sideways, they're fine. But the benefits of invisible wealth don't stop at work or spending. In many cases, they extend all the way into family life, especially when it comes to how children develop their relationship with money. And this is where things get really interesting. Now let's talk about something that rarely gets discussed when people think about wealth: family dynamics. Because visible wealth doesn't just affect strangers or coworkers, it also changes how your own family behaves. Researchers studying affluent households noticed a surprising pattern. The more financial support adult children received from wealthy parents, the less wealth those children accumulated themselves. Think about that for a second. At first it sounds backwards. You'd assume receiving money would make it easier to build wealth. But what often happens instead is psychological. When children grow up seeing obvious wealth, big houses, luxury cars, constant spending, it quietly sends a message: there's always a safety net. And when people believe a safety net exists, they tend to take fewer financial responsibilities seriously. Spending increases, saving decreases, long-term planning weakens. Over time, that mindset can slowly erode the habits that actually create wealth. But parents who appear financially ordinary create a completely different environment. Their children grow up believing success must be built through effort, discipline, and smart decisions. They develop self-reliance. They learn to budget. They learn to save. They learn to build their own financial foundation. And interestingly, those habits often lead to stronger long-term outcomes than children raised inside visible affluence. Because when wealth stays invisible, support can still exist, but it's strategic, not expected. No social pressure, no entitlement, no assumptions about inheritance, just opportunity when it truly matters. But the biggest advantage of invisible wealth might not be social or professional or even family-related. It might actually be psychological. Because the difference between someone who looks wealthy and someone who is wealthy shows up most clearly in how they experience everyday life. Now let's talk about the psychological side of this, because this might be the biggest difference of all. Psychologists have studied something called hedonic adaptation. Basically, humans get used to improvements in lifestyle really fast. You buy a luxury car, and for the first few weeks it feels amazing. People notice. You feel successful. It's exciting. But after a few months, it just becomes your car. The same thing happens with expensive watches, designer clothes, bigger houses, almost everything tied to visible wealth. The emotional boost fades, the excitement disappears, and suddenly the upgrade that once felt incredible just feels normal, which means people start chasing the next upgrade, new car, new house, new luxury purchase, and the cycle never stops. But invisible wealth works differently. Instead of chasing temporary emotional highs from purchases, the quietly wealthy person builds something much more powerful: financial security. They know they can handle emergencies. They know they could walk away from a bad job. They know their future is protected. That quiet confidence doesn't fade after a few months. It sits in the background of everyday life like a safety net. Decisions become less stressful. Arguments about money become less common. Sleep becomes easier because financial anxiety isn't constantly hanging over your head. Meanwhile, the person who looks wealthy often lives under constant pressure to maintain the appearance. Every year requires new upgrades to keep the image alive. New car, new wardrobe, new experiences to prove they're still successful. It becomes a treadmill that never really stops. But the person driving the old Honda Civic, they stepped off that treadmill a long time ago. And because of that, the long-term math starts working massively in their favor. All right, now let's look at the math behind all of this, because this is where the gap between looking wealthy and being wealthy becomes massive. Imagine two people in America earning the exact same income, let's say $200,000 a year. On paper, their financial potential is identical, but their choices are completely different. Person number one lives fairly modestly, nothing extreme, just controlled spending. They drive a normal car, keep their lifestyle reasonable, and save about 25% of their income. That's $50,000 invested every year. Now assume those investments grow at about 7% annually, which is roughly the long-term average of the stock market. After 25 years, that steady investing grows to about $3.4 million. Not flashy, not dramatic, just consistent compounding. Now look at person number two. Same income, same career, but their lifestyle is built around visible success, luxury cars, premium travel, expensive neighborhoods, constant upgrades. So instead of saving 25%, they only manage to save about 5% of their income. That's $10,000 per year going into investments. Over the same 25 years at the same 7% return, that grows to about $680,000. Same salary, same time horizon, but one person ends up with 5 times the wealth of the other. And here's the interesting part. The first person, the one quietly saving and investing, probably looks middle class from the outside. The second person, the one spending most of their income, probably looks wealthy. But financially, the reality is completely reversed. One person has options, security, freedom to walk away if they want. The other person is still dependent on their paycheck. And this is exactly what the Millionaire Next Door lifestyle is all about. But when you zoom out, it reveals something much bigger about how we define success in the first place. Because real success isn't about what you can show people. It's about what you don't have to show. So let's come back to that guy in the parking lot. The one pulling in every morning with the 2011 Honda Civic. Faded paint, small dent on the bumper. The car everyone walks past without thinking twice. To his coworkers, he looks ordinary, maybe even a little behind. They see the old car and assume he's struggling, or at least that he hasn't made it yet. But what they can't see is the $4.2 million quietly compounding in the background. They can't see the paid-off house. They can't see the fully funded college accounts. They can't see the fact that he could stop working tomorrow if he felt like it. Because real wealth is often invisible. And that's exactly the point. The Millionaire Next Door lifestyle flips the normal definition of success upside down. Success isn't the watch on your wrist. It's the investments you didn't spend. Success isn't the car in your driveway. It's the financial freedom sitting in your accounts. Success isn't the lifestyle you display. It's the options you quietly own. The ability to walk away from a bad job. The ability to handle emergencies without panic. The ability to choose how you spend your time instead of selling every hour. And all of that comes from one simple decision repeated over and over again. Choosing compound growth over social approval. Because the truth is, the people who feel superior when they see that old Civic are often the same people who will still be working at 70 years old, not because they want to, but because they have to. Meanwhile, the person driving it, they already won the game. They just never felt the need to prove it. Because the real secret most people never learn is this: wealth isn't about what you show, it's about what you keep.